everyone, and welcome back to Overcoming the Podcast. Goodness, I have not said that in a while. And that's what today we're going to talk about because I just kind of disappeared. Not intentionally. However, it kind of came about when a certain diagnosis hit and I had to manage different things. And one extra thing, like the podcast, which can be just extra steps and things of that nature, became really hard to manage. And I didn't really have the capacity to communicate that. And so I apologize if anyone feels like I just left you. That was not my intention to just like ghost. However, I think it is a really good lesson in understanding and what I'm going to be talking about more this summer. Because as y'all know, I am a storyteller. I talk about lived experience, and also I am a certified trauma professional and a doctor of occupational therapy. And I talk all about these certain topics when it comes to overcoming, particularly talk a lot about overcoming trauma, because that's kind of in my wheelhouse. So as I have in my life been healing and growing and doing lots of things, I have been gaining a lot of information. And I've also been doing a lot of work in therapy. And as I've been doing a lot of work in therapy, my trauma symptoms have been very significantly managed to the point where some almost completely go away unless there's a certain type of trigger. And day to day has been pretty functional. That was except for executive dysfunction. Now, executive dysfunction is basically these higher level brain tasks that are really like the adult stuff: problem solving, organization, time management, planning. And it wasn't until my work as attempting to do all the things by myself as a business owner that I realized the level of executive dysfunction that I had, and that I've had it my entire life looking back since I was a little kiddo. So I want to talk a little bit about this and how this experience led me to getting diagnosed with ADHD. So that's where I've been. I was diagnosed with ADHD shortly before my 30th birthday, which is right around the time where I stopped talking to y'all. And for me, it was really just very frustrating process, to be honest, and foreign to me, because I have never seen a psychiatrist in my life. I've seen social workers, I've seen psychologists, but I've never seen a psychiatrist. And for those who do not know, psychiatrists are typically the ones who have the power to diagnose when it comes to medical conditions in that way. And so ADHD would be considered under that envelope. And so the therapist that I was working with at the time did not have in their ability to diagnose me with ADHD. So basically, I got to a certain point in my healing, and we've known about my issues with task initiation, especially when there's too many steps. My brain just short circuits. And it's been that way my entire life. I can recall when my room was too messy as a child, I would just sit there and not know what to do and just sob. If there's packing involved or anything that is big steps or something also that maybe I'm not as emotionally invested in, but I know there's a lot of things, I have a really hard time starting and just knowing how to start. And the more steps there is to something, or the more complex something feels, my brain just kind of shuts down even more. And I get into this like freeze mode where it's like, is this trauma avoidance or is this something else? And so essentially, I worked with my therapist quite a bit on my complex trauma symptoms, and I worked with her for like 2 years. And I brought this up at my intake of like, this is one of the things that I struggle with, and it's really hard. And I got to this point in my therapy where I technically don't have the diagnosis of ADHD, not ADHD, of anxiety anymore. I don't meet the qualifications for that. When it comes to regular PTSD, I don't meet the qualifications for that diagnosis either. Complex trauma, I do have complex trauma, but complex trauma like CPTSD is not an accepted actual diagnosis in the DSM-5 in the United States as of now. And so I did not have that diagnosis. And it got to the point in therapy where we were talking a lot about executive dysfunction, and started with like imposter syndrome or anything else that maybe felt limiting about that. And it wasn't the trauma piece. I had done a lot of EMDR on it, and I was just like, I got to this awareness level where I'm like, I'm not scared anymore. I'm not avoiding anymore. I worked through that stuff, and I still just can't. But what was really interesting is if I would drink enough caffeine, like I would do in grad school, I would drink enough caffeine, I would describe it as like my brain turning on, and then I could sit down and do some of the things. But as an entrepreneur, this is really frustrating because I felt very unreliable. I would forget certain emails or dates or not respond to things very quickly, or if there were too many things in my mental load or that I was just thinking of constantly or things that I had to do in my mental to-do list, I would get really overwhelmed and just not know how to access doing all these little things. I would do rescheduling all the time. And there was just a lot of things that happened that I had a lot of shame as a business owner and as someone who was leading this community and a podcast host and all of these things that I fell short. And I was really frustrated because I just didn't understand why. And it wasn't until I started learning more about inattentive ADHD that things made sense. Because what we know of ADHD is very different from what I knew when I was a kid. It was the little boy who was destructive and jumping up and down and hyperactive, essentially. And what I didn't realize until I started getting on neurodivergent TikTok, because I have some neurodivergent friends and they'd send me things and whatever. And long story short, I ended up on like ADHD TikTok, people talking about ADHD in women and how different it was, and a lot of people having these like late diagnoses, and particularly like when you get into different roles in your lives, that this dysfunction really starts to show up, like women who became mothers, or women who had different levels of responsibility in business, or whatever it may be. And for me, it was becoming an entrepreneur, and that was very hard. And like I said, very shameful because I felt like I was letting people down because my brain just couldn't do the things that I wanted it to do. Even when I was motivated, even when I was passionate, there was just some times where my brain just didn't brain. It just, I couldn't, I have so many ideas and passions and creativity. And when it comes to executing the little tiny things to get there, I have so much about the big picture and even the organization process behind it. But when it comes to executing the small steps it takes to be able to do it successfully, I failed time and time again. My brain would just stop. And so, like I said, at first attribute it to imposter syndrome or fear or anxiety or stress response or whatever it may be. And I realized after ruling this out with my therapist that a couple years later, and most of the symptoms being gone for all of the other things, and working through the things and feeling really confident and comfortable in who I am and as a human, as a business owner, and all of these things, that still there were times that my brain just wouldn't turn on. And I had this brain fog that's like consistent that I've had for as long as I can remember. And to be honest, I've contributed to fatigue, because I do have autoimmune thyroid health issues. And so I just thought like, this is what I'm dealt with. Right. Also, all I know myself as someone who has the gift of gab, who talks quickly, who has big highs, big lows, ups and downs. And like, this is just who I am. This is my personality. And this is what I've been since I was a little kid. And I had this recollection when I was realizing how far these things went back, that one of the things about ADHD, particularly in girls, is challenge with emotional regulation, meaning really high highs and really low lows, to the point where when I would have emotions, I would not know how to manage them. Everything in my body just felt so intense on one spectrum and intense on the other. To the point where like my abuser would say that I was bipolar because I had emotions. And it turns out, I mean, obviously I was never diagnosed with bipolar and there was any other symptoms of anything like that. I just had emotions on both spectrums and I've always felt things deeply. And it turns out that high highs and low lows and these intensity and expressing emotions may also be an ADHD symptom with self-regulation. And I learned that ADHD is actually kind of named incorrectly. It's a disorder of self-regulation, which can lead to challenges like attention, but it's the same part of the brain, the executive functioning. Self-regulation is actually dealt with in this similar part of the brain, which oddly enough, that part of the brain is impacted in developmental or complex trauma. See where I'm going here? So what I found as I've been researching more, and I knew a little bit that like PTSD and ADHD can be misdiagnosed. And it's like, what came first, chicken or the egg, right? Similar symptoms, dysregulation, that kind of thing. And we don't know what is trauma versus what is, like ADHD can have the genetic component to it, right? So it's like, we don't really know what is what. And also I just want to like say here too, that like, I'm not an expert in ADHD by any means. This is just things that I've like recognized and heard and learned since being diagnosed. So if I say anything incorrectly, please let me know. But this is from my own knowledge as well. So anyways, back to what I was saying. So self-regulation. So self-regulation is in a very similar part of the brain as all of these higher level cognitive tasks. They're actually part of executive functioning, which a lot of people don't realize. And so when I was younger, the biggest thing that stands out is my inability to self-regulate. And I can think back to as early as my like 4th or 5th birthday that I would have friends come over. And I was told beforehand, because I had big emotions and I got really, really excited. I just got so excited. I loved my friends. I just big emotions. I was this goofy, considered like wild, dynamic kiddo, right? And I was told before friends come over, I remember being sit down and have this conversation, that they were giving me a scale that was like our little code. And it was like hot, warm, cool, cold. If I ever got too hot or like extra hot, meaning like my emotions were way too high or my arousal was way too high, then they would have to send my friends home. And I think it was at that moment that I learned how to mask what I was feeling so my friends would not get sent home. There were moments in that day that I remember that stick out a little bit. Because like I said, it was like a really pivotal, like, it's a core memory, right? And I would get excited and happy. And I just remember like someone looking at me going, hot, hot, hot. And I was like, and I just felt myself like lose my enthusiasm and I have to like pull into myself and just try and make myself look calm and not as excited or whatever. And it was really hard for me because like I felt things really big and I wanted to express them and I loved my people and I was so excited and people were celebrating me and I got really excited with presents and I was a little kid. And so I think over the years, something that I realized is that I was a child who had different needs and wasn't as obvious what was going on. My youngest brother had a stroke when he was 1.5. He had a serious and has a serious disability and had different therapies and that kind of thing. I also struggled with my emotions and my attention and things looking back that like, wow, this makes a lot of sense. This is more what ADHD in women would look like to me. More typically from what I've heard, ADHD in women is usually more inattentive. Like I was a little daydreamer kid. I was like zone out, head in the clouds, dreamer, not even paying attention, lose train of thought while talking, that kind of thing. That's who I was. And so I'd be seen as ditzy or silly or whatever. Like I was just like my head in the clouds girl, and I would just be like discounted for that. I was also the teacher's pet. But I was this ditzy whatever person at home, and the big emotions person at home, but at school I was perfect. I was smart. I was putting all of my energy, all of the time, always focused on my grades, on everything that I was doing. I was the teacher's pet, getting as much attention as I could because dang it, I was the smart one that got me attention, that did exactly what I needed to do. And I realized that I was hyper focusing, which hyper focus is a stage of ADHD where if you care about something enough or it's just something that is intense for you, that you can overly like zone out everything else and take all of your brain power and focus on something to the point where you get things done in minutes to what people would take hours or whatever. You get things done a lot faster and you're so zoned in, and it almost feels like, it feels not quite manic. That's not the word. It's just like so intense. Okay. And I realized that what happened is I would have these periods my entire life of hyper focusing in school, but then I would come home. And I remember this comment that my mom gave to me one time. I was a straight A student. I was so well behaved. I was perfect. I was paying attention. I was everything I needed to be. I was on the ball. I was gifted. I was straight A student. Like, I was good, man. School was my thing. When I would come home and every day I'd be exhausted and emotional, and just, it was such a different me. And I remember my mom saying something to me, and she's like, "What is wrong with you? Your teachers say that you are just this perfect angel child. You are so on top of anything, and you come here and you're a mess. Who are you? You're not even the same kid. And you're emotional, and you're forgetful, and you can't even clean up after yourself. You can't even close the door behind you when you're making food, like the pantry door. Like, what is wrong with you? Why do you have to be so different in both places?" I had ADHD. I had undiagnosed ADHD because when I was hyper focused while I was at school, I would come home and be exhausted because I used all of that brain power, and then I felt overloaded. So I would basically figured out that, like, I have been in this lifelong stage of hyperfocus burnout, hyperfocus burnout, hyperfocus burnout. And so I was the overachiever and all of these things. And on top of that, my trauma survival responses were people please, be perfect, do all the things, make myself not a threat. So the combination of the ADHD brain and the trauma responses was that I have to be perfect, I have to achieve, I have to do this in this exact setting when I need to. And then the moment I can release, I fully combust. But I didn't have awareness and I didn't understand, and no one in my family understood either. And also, I mean, it was the 90s. Like, that ADHD was not a thing for women, girls, and it was definitely not something that was diagnosed or screened for or anything. And I was just told that I was just like a bad kid. That's what I was. I was just a bad, dramatic, daydreamy, head in the clouds, removed from reality kid. And what is wrong with me? And I still to this day can see this grimace in my mom's face. Anytime something would happen, she'd be like, "Oh, what is wrong with you? You're such a mess. You're so incompetent." Like, even into teenage years and even early adult years, even recently. How are you even adult? How do you even survive? I would like forget to close a cupboard, usually, or what it was, or forget to put a plate away, or whatever it is. You just disgusting. What is wrong with you? And I had this realization. These symptoms that I had that were actually symptoms that I was told was something was wrong with me and my personality, I'm dramatic, I'm too much, or whatever, was in part undiagnosed ADHD. That I look back and a lot of these symptoms that I learned about had been there my whole life. And the things that I got in trouble for were ADHD symptoms. And I was told I was just trying to be bad or play or get out of something. And that same memory, when I would sit there and be overloaded with my room being dirty and not being able to start, I would go in there and sob. And my mother would look at me and see it as me trying to get out of doing something myself and be like, "I'm not going to help you. Just stop playing the sympathy card. You can do this, blah, blah, blah." And then when I would do it, I wouldn't know how else to plan the task. So I had a bunch of papers and trash and whatever. And I remember like tucking them behind my dresser. And that was seen as defiance and not doing it correctly on purpose. And why can't you just follow the rules? Why can't you just do it the right way? I had this realization after I was diagnosed, and it's kind of like a grief journey, which I'll talk about later. But just to sum it up quickly, my parents were emotionally immature. They didn't have self-regulation skills. They didn't have capacity for a lot of things that were even slightly challenging. And in that, they didn't have tools or learn about these differences themselves. And my punishment was when they didn't have tools to support these symptoms. That was me as a neurodivergent kiddo. I was too much whatever. I didn't fit the mold. Also, personality wise, especially my mother was very stoic, orderly. We don't have emotions. We don't express things. And here I am, this dynamic, goofy, head in the clouds, all over the place mess of a child. I was miserable to her. She could not understand how something could be so out of order, could come to be her daughter. Meanwhile, the other parent was very much like me, now looking back. And I'm not saying anything one way or another about a diagnosis because I don't know. But big emotions, over the top, kind of goofy when they were in good moods, but also very volatile emotions, very low lows, and physically and psychologically abusive on top of that. But personality wise, when they weren't like that, they were a lot like me. Dynamic, goofy, have big emotions, loud. I've always been so loud. Oh my gosh, my mother hated that about me. Shayla, why are you screaming? Oh, like everything. Another thing, regulation when it comes to regulating your excitement. Your voice even can be regulated. Your tone, your like that comes from regulation, dynamics, like I didn't have that control and those skills, right? And so because what happened is that emotionally I realized that a lot of the emotional neglect that I experienced from my mother was because of my ADHD symptoms that she did not have the tools to manage. And I was so opposite of her that she wanted nothing to do with this chaos. She wanted to control it. And if she couldn't, she would just avoid me. There was distance. I know I triggered the heck out of her. But so what happened is I was not liked as a human, as a daughter, because of my ADHD symptoms. And then I took it a step further and realized my other parent didn't have the tools to discipline or support me or know how to help me either. And when they didn't have that, then the only thing they knew was to control me and like micromanage. And I had this big, beautiful, vibrant, like I was just goofy, adorable. I was neurodivergent, but like I was just the sweetest, kindest, goofy, dynamic kiddo. And you know what? I was a lot. I wasn't too much, but I was a lot. And I know that even with friends, I was a lot. I know the neurodivergent makes a lot of sense now, right? But because the other parent also didn't have the skills and the tools, their ability to manage me, it's like I wasn't at home. Like I said, at home, I was just kind of like, oh, I would get home from school and I'm just like, whoa, right? Exhausted, mask off, but also like I used so much energy to be the good student that I was just like so dysregulated. And a dysregulated child is hard to manage. A dysregulated child is hard to manage. It is. But also, it is a parent's responsibility to learn how to support their child. And mine, again, were both emotionally immature, didn't have capacity, trauma in their pasts. And one way was criticize and avoid you, like make you feel horrible about yourself and just like, ugh, and then avoid you completely and not be able to be there for you emotionally and sometimes even physically. Do the things, go through the motions of provide, be provider, but I don't know how to do anything else for you, crazy kid. The other one was, if you don't do exactly as I say and exactly as I do, and it doesn't support me how you act, then I lose my temper and I hurt you. And as you get older and you start thinking differently than me, then I start psychologically manipulating you a whole lot, which I've been doing a little bit throughout my whole life, but that's kind of what happened. And so I kind of hit this grief journey of I was abused because of undiagnosed ADHD symptoms and parents not having the tools to know how to support me. And I grew up hating these things about me because my mom just saw me as this mess. What is wrong with you? And I was very different from her. And I just attributed it to different personalities. But I see now that I was neurodivergent. I was a little ADHD girly. And my mom, who's very stoic and calm and didn't have emotions, my other brother, too, same way. Stoic, calm, no emotions, quiet, introverted. I am this big, dynamic, big needs, big emotions, loud, but also forgetful and messy and dysfunctional. I didn't fit into the organized household. So then what? If you don't know how to help them, you control them, you scare them. And like I said, I learned how to mask and started from as early as my 5th birthday, when if I was too excited, my friends would have to go home. It's 4th or 5th, somewhere in there, maybe 6th, I don't know. But anyways, I was young. Point being, I am going to talk a little bit more about ADHD this in a like mini series this summer. Not because I am trying to get you to diagnose yourself with ADHD, just so you know. Like that's not my goal. I I believe that like you always should use your discernment when it comes to anything. But I also think that information is power, and I think that storytelling helps kind of wake us up, and we naturally compare and understand and just makes us think, right? And so since I've been doing a lot of this, and ADHD has impacted me lifelong and in many stages, and now that I am medicated properly and for the first time in my life, I feel like I can actually do some of these adulting things and manage myself outside of like forced structure or work environments. Like when I'm an entrepreneur and I get to choose everything, it was very different and very hard for me. And that's because of my ADHD. And I want people to understand more about ADHD in general, not only because it's often underdiagnosed, but also because there is a overlap between complex trauma and ADHD. So, it is a newly researched thing. However, it is out there. And also with this platform being 90% women, recognizing that there are symptoms that present differently in women than men. So things may have been missed. And if you are anywhere in any of the social media communities, there is a lot of late diagnosed neurodivergent humans. Now, I also pose the idea that complex trauma or developmental trauma survivors are neurodivergent. Neurodivergent meaning different brain, right? So, knowing what we know about developmental trauma and how it changes the brain and can alter things, I pose that complex trauma is also a form of neurodivergence, of functioning differently. And I think that regardless of whatever diagnosis you want to give yourself, that neurodivergence and a lot of these themes that I'll be talking about, like masking and self-regulation and just like some of the researchy stuff, I think that it will be really helpful for a lot of people. Also, I'll be talking about executive dysfunction within this quite a bit. And executive dysfunction is a huge symptom of like long-term effect of childhood trauma, again, because of how the brain develops. So you may think that like, wow, this overlaps, blah, blah, blah. Like it's another thing of like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Is it both? Is it one or the other? And what I've heard as well is that a lot of people usually get diagnosed with one or the other and then realize, oh, I have this. Like get diagnosed with ADHD and then trauma shows up, or the complex trauma also applies, and they get into therapy and they realize, oh man, like this childhood complex trauma is impacting me too. Or it's complex trauma survivors who are then like, I think there's something else here, and later in life get diagnosed with ADHD. Like I said, when your roles or things shift where you have to take on more capacity mentally, especially. So I think it's important to know, again, I'm equipping you with information and you do with that what you will. But what I have found is that executive dysfunction is a very hallmark challenge that long-term many complex or childhood trauma survivors deal with. And without understanding it, we really feel stupid and shameful and dysfunctional or unreliable. And it's just not the case. It is your brain. And it is likely your brain because of something else, right? This is not you as a human being. Like I was told this is my personality and I'm just too much or whatever, dramatic or all of this stuff. And so because of that, I had a lot of self-hatred. I had a lot of self-hatred that now I've worked into like this new like self-love journey, but it took me a while because I was hated for my ADHD symptoms. I was abused because they couldn't manage my ADHD symptoms. And that's heartbreaking. However, I can honor my inner child and my inner teen, and even my early 20s me, who just felt really dysfunctional. Because, like, I'm smart. I'm a smart human being, always been smart. But man, do I feel stupid sometimes. And it's when it's related to ADHD symptoms that I now know are ADHD symptoms because, again, under medication it is significantly more managed and I'm way more functional and I can do the things and maintain a routine and like all these things, which is like amazing. But up until then, I really like when it came to anything like a big change in my life, I couldn't sustain something like a whole life daily routine shift for more than 2 weeks. So many people could do this. So many people could just decide they were going to change their lives and their motivation and determination that they would do it. And like at some point, my brain just stopped. I have time blindness where I would just like zone out and not even know what time it was, what was happening. I'd either super early or late for appointments or forget they even existed. And again, you just feel stupid and dysfunctional and unreliable. But I'm here to say that with tools and supports and management that you can support yourself and you can do the things that you need and want to do. And also, as an occupational therapist who is trained in understanding ADHD and different types of like cognitive rehab and executive dysfunction, I've been very fortunate that I have a lot of context and education and understanding to support myself through some of these things. Because in my experience, medication has not changed everything. It's made it to the point where I have a threshold to manage with skills and supports. So that's what I'm going to say about that for now. I will be talking a little bit more about my journey in and out of things, but the podcast is back and I'm sorry I ghosted you. I just really got overloaded and a lot was happening at once. And also my brain and body were dysregulated when I was trying new medication that did not sit right in my system. And so when that happens, I was not myself and I couldn't be who I needed to be the host or the speaker or anything that I am. And the podcast is kind of like an extra side passion project. I still kept up on SOS, but I pulled back a little bit. Some of you realized, but like I didn't have the capacity, like I said, to share before. And I'm at a place now where I'm in a really, really good place. And I'm just excited to move forward in all of these things. And on a business standpoint, I have help now. I didn't have as much help or support, or I didn't accept as much help or support before. I was trying to do it all myself. And I was like, I can do this. I'm a strong, independent woman. Don't need no man. Don't need no help. Don't need whatever. And I now have an assistant to support me. Very excited about that. And I have some other people on my team to support me in getting these out regularly. Some people who understand my brain and people who can realize how fast my thoughts go when I'm in creative mode and help me organize the things to get there. Because I really do and have since the beginning have this huge vision for SOS. And there's so many things that I want to share with you and create for you that can really, really, really give so much information and teach in ways and just metaphors and connections and all of these things that just make so much sense and help break down so much of this complex stuff simply and really, truly bring you back to you and blossoming and loving your life. That's what I do here. That's why I do. That's why I share the things I do. Survivors Overcoming Silence first started off with survivors who were silenced have a place in community. It's turned into survivors living life loudly, healing loudly, overcoming and boldly blossoming into the beautiful freaking individual flower that they are. Finding that individuality and that spark. Becoming your true, authentic self. Unmasking. And so that is what I have. And since the beginning of this, I've had this vision of the courses, everything, like since the beginning of picking colors and a logo and all of the things, I knew what I was going to do with this. The problem was when it comes to the logistical steps of the courses, it's not the teaching. Y'all know I can get up here and I can talk. I know all the information. It's the organizing and the executing and the uploading and the things that it makes sure it has to have and checking all the dots and the boxes correctly and all of these things that, like, as a business owner, I didn't realize how much I would have to do myself in order to make something come to life the right way. And I failed. I was not able to produce the vision that I saw. I was not able to come through in the way that I wanted to. And it was because I had an unknown barrier that was unmanaged. And I was just trying to push through by just mindsetting myself through it and just encouraging myself and working through imposter syndrome and all that stuff, because it was more. It was more. It was my brain. It was my brain. And also how I got through grad school was body doubling, being around other people. We'll talk more about that too. And massive amounts of caffeine on a weekend and doing all of my work from like 2 weeks in a coffee shop from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. one day. And then the next day coming back from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. And that's how I did my work. Again, hyper focus, burnout, fatigue, hyper focus, burnout, fatigue. And since I've been more regulated and living in a cycle that is not hyper focus or burnout fatigue, and I've just been kind of at a neutral zone, it became clear what these symptoms are and what actually is happening, because I wasn't forcing them to not exist. I wasn't pushing through them. I'm not exhausted anymore, but I can say that every single time that I take my medication, I'm reminded that brain fog is related to inattentive ADHD for me personally. And life is very different without that. I never knew life without it, really. I just thought that's who I was. Head in the clouds. No, that's ADHD for me. So anyways, like I said, coming back, I have people who I recorded with almost a year ago now. And to be honest, I feel horrible. And if they never want to work with me again, I understand. Like that's hard. I have things recorded that just need to be posted, and I'm going to have help with posting. And I'm going to reach back out to those creators and that kind of thing. But I've also been recording with new guests. So if you know of anyone who may be interested in coming in and sharing a topic to educate everyone about overcoming and anything that may be helpful for trauma survivors and reclaiming their life and getting back to themselves, reach out to me and I will do what I can to connect you with my assistant to schedule, because I will no longer be in charge of scheduling because my brain messes up that a lot. And I don't want to be seen as unreliable or impact any kind of professional relationship in doing so. So, and plus I want it to be done right, So I'm very grateful that, like, I have the ability to not worry about all the little things, which consumed so much of my time. And I was creating less because I was so consumed about doing all the little things right and making sure I had all of these things correct. But now it's really freed me up to have my creativity and then someone else organize the things for me, which is amazing. So I'm really, really excited to share more about this with you. We're going to be switching our podcast comeback times. Podcasts will be posted on Monday from now on, just so you know. Was Wednesday. We're moving to Monday. And this ADHD series, this mini series that I'm doing for the summer, I'm not going to really have a schedule. In ADHD fashion, it is spontaneous. When I have the energy, when I have the wavelength, whenever, it's just going to pop up when I record it and when I put it on and that kind of thing. So definitely subscribe and stay on and stay updated and make sure you're on the email list too. We're actually going to be using that because, again, I don't have to be the one to run it. So like my assistant can support in doing that. So we can actually like have a better relationship just off of social media, which is nice. Yeah, so I'm really excited for this next chapter, not only of the podcast, but for SOS. And I'm just very appreciative of this community and these survivors and the people who are compassionate and understanding and knowing these things, because I've shared before, is like, I am not any better than you. I'm not any different than you. I've just been doing work for a lot and I have some good knowledge with the stuff that I've done. There's nothing special about me or different that makes me be able to heal to a certain way or level up in self-development or teach or whatever. It's not in me. I am still a neurodivergent human. I still am a complex trauma survivor. I've just been doing a whole lot of work for a lot of years and I have a lot of context and a lot of information. And I break things down in ways like my brain like connects topics and makes connections like none other. And maybe that is a neurodivergent gift. But like that's why I'm so self-aware of the things and like I make connections really easily. I'm a pattern recognizer so much. Which again is another neurodivergent thing. However, I am still a human and a healing human. And there are things that I'm not going to be perfect. And as a business owner, I'm going to have to accept that. That's a little bit harder. As a human being, I'm okay with that. But as a business owner and as an entrepreneur, I have a harder time with accepting that. But I'm getting there. And I'm very open and honest on the journey. And the thing is like, I know the content that I am going to put out is amazing. And I have support to bring that to life now. Not even just an assistant, but I have a trauma sensitive mentor who's like a freaking expert in the field. They know exactly what it is. They've written textbooks. Like, come on, man, on trauma specifically. So, it's like, okay, I have a lot of support to help make this vision come to life, and people who believe in me and who see me and who see the vision and see what we're doing here and want to support it in coming to life. And so I'm very grateful to have the team of humans behind me that I do. And I can't believe I'm saying that I have a team, because it used to be just Team Taylor, but it's Team SOS. And I am Dr. Taylor as the founder and face of SOS. But I am no longer a one-woman team, which is really cool. And a little scary, not gonna lie, it's really scary. But I have some very great humans on board. And also I make sure I do trauma sensitive training with anyone who comes onto my team, because I think it's really important. I put so much emphasis into the message and how I do things and why I show up certain ways and whatever. It's always in my brain. And so my worry has been like releasing control of that to share the vision of SOS, right? And like, can you do it the same way I can? I don't know, right? So I'm making sure that I'm like training people into like basically going through like the problem solving and like the reasoning of my brain. Is this why we do things this way? And this is why I say this way. And this is the language we use with this. And this is why this. And this is the brain does this. So we have to worry about, think about this and how you say this, and want to make sure we don't do too much because of this and whatever. Like there's so many things that was like, especially when thinking about survivors and potential triggers and all those things. Like I think about all of those things constantly, and my delivery and safety comes first. And so I just work really hard to be as trauma sensitive as I can. And I know I've done the work, but so I'm also with anyone I bring on, making sure that like they have the trauma sensitive education as well. And so anyone who's even responding to emails has that same kind of knowledge and understanding. And also one thing that I've been doing as well is I am providing at least a session or two of coaching to anyone on my staff to just kind of also build their own self-awareness of their stuff. So we're not projecting things onto other people, because I believe that knowledge and awareness is huge power and important. And so that's what I do. That's part of my training, is I kind of go through like basically what I would do with coaching with other survivors, and like some of the things that I do with holistic wellness and finding your limitations and what kind of things you want to work on, and recognizing like that kind of thing, like what things you want to work on in self-development in your life. And, recognizing our biases and things like that, again, because I think it's so important, so important. And so I don't want this community to feel like it suffers in quality or in any of the things that I consider trauma sensitive or my approach, just because I'm bringing on a team. I'm really working to do as much as I can to inform my people to the level that feels right. And I only choose people who are solid human beings, and making sure that they are on the same page as me. as humans and business wise and all of the things. And I'm very grateful to have the incredible humans on my team that I do, and to be able to bring this next level of SOS finally to life. Patreon tanked. I wasn't able to carry out the way that I wanted to. And then if anything goes on in my life, like I've learned how to do it now. I know I'm going to start doing evergreen courses. Like they'll just be there. They'll be there. And when they first come out, there will be discounted rates. So they're not going away, but they will be significantly discounted when they first come out, just so you know. So there's still going to be like a reward for those people who get it early. But I'm not going to be the type of entrepreneur that does this cycle. I'm present. Like I am changing my content to work with my ADHD brain and knowing that the ups and downs of how things work for me. Some days I may have so much energy and mental ability, and other days just not. And so I have to recognize that as I pour into my content. It's just going to be there for anyone to go at their own pace, with as little involvement for me as possible. It's going to stand on its own. And it will still be important. It'll still be valuable. And I really just see so much value in it. And I'm just excited to make this happen. And I'm doing what I can to honor my capacity and my brain and my energy levels and how things work for me. So, and still get the information out to you that is necessary. So that's my plan. I will keep you updated on all the things, but things are shifting, and I'm very grateful for the alignment and the understanding and the awareness. And I'm happy to go through the diagnosis journey in one of them, because it was a nightmare. Anyway, nightmare. And it took a freaking long time to get to what I needed, but I did, and I'm here, and I'm very grateful for it. And now I'm talking about it. So thanks for being here. Come listen to the mini series. Come listen to the regular episodes that are going to be coming back out. I appreciate each and every one of you. I hope that you have whatever day feels right to you, and take care of yourself. And remember that this is just one lifelong journey of overcoming, and I'm here to help you, give you some tools along the way. Talk to you next time.